Oh, and I was joking earlier that I can take off my DNR hat because I'm sharing slides today with Bethany, and I got my Klondike Derby hat on here. So, but it's kind of warm in my basement, so I'm not going to do that. But so, welcome everybody. My name is Benji Kohn, a Minnesota DNR Mentor Network Coordinator. I am also kind of an avid dog lover, I guess, and I'm joined today with Bethany Hway. She's the founder of the Klondike Dog Derby, and we're just going to share some stories about dog sledding and mushing in the upper Midwest in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and talk a little bit about Iditarod, because I think we have to touch on that just a little bit.
Thank you, Benji, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Bethany?
Yeah, my name is Bethany Hway, and I grew up in northern Minnesota. I was born into mushing. I mean, my parents had sled dogs. They lived in Illinois when I was born, and they actually moved up north into Minnesota to pursue kind of that passion of the sled dog sport. So it was something that from, day one, I was, getting bundled up while my dad was doing training runs and put in the sled, and I grew up with the dogs. It was a big part of my life, guiding sled dog trips into the Boundary Waters, eventually racing, and then handling for my dad's races throughout the Midwest in Maine, and then in Alaska when he did the Iditarod in 2002. So I grew up in it. I went to the Twin Cities for college, and ended up staying. My husband and I lived down there for actually almost 20 years before we moved back up north almost a year ago. And it's great to be back up north. But during my time in the cities, there was a point, it was actually 5 years ago, when I was watching the start of the John Bear Grease, and my dad was there. He was a race marshal, and I kind of had that like old familiar itch for the sport. I was like, man, I miss being in this world and being a part of mushing and that community. And so I texted a friend and I said, what do you think? Should we bring a sled dog race to Excelsior? That was where my office was. And he said, yeah, that's crazy. Let's do it. So we did, and thus the Klondike was born.
That's awesome. It does kind of get in your blood, I think. Everybody I know that is serious musher was kind of born into it. There's a few people that get into it a little bit later in life and enjoy the sport, but I was never born into it. We got our first husky when I was in my mid-teens probably, and hooked him up behind the radio flyer, pulled around the farm and stuff, but never really expanded above that or beyond that, probably due to my parents not wanting to get too many dogs. But I've always had friends that have had sled dogs, so I've run dogs into the Cannon Bottoms by Red Wing, up into the Boundary Waters, on winter camping trips. And when I had the Environmental Learning Center down in Northfield, we ran up into the Chippewa National Forest on some winter camping trips. So, and now we have a husky of our own that we got from this trip. That's my daughter in the sled and me driving at our friend Tom Bauer's kennel over in Michigan, Otter River Kennels. And they had a litter of pups that they were getting rid of, and we took the last one home. The girls fell in love with it. So now we have one of these blonde dogs in the back. That's probably her parents, but her siblings, but she's been an awesome dog. So now it's kind of getting back into ski touring and pulling the bikes and stuff like that, which we can talk a little bit later. But under the history of dog sledding, I think we got to talk a little bit about that because it's been around for eons. This is kind of the agenda of the day. We're going to talk about the Iditarod. It's kind of the biggest race in the world these days. Minnesota dog sledding, where you can go, where you can find it, and events to experience more. So Bethany sent me this picture. This is from the 1932 Olympics up in Lake Placid, New York. And you had a story about this, Bethany, right?
Yeah, one of the interesting things about those Olympics was that Leonard Seppala, who we'll get to a little bit in this history, he is the one who owned the very famous sled dogs, Balto, who you may know, and Togo, who are used in that famous serum run. up in Alaska that became what, many, many movies are based on. And of course, the Iditarod sled dog race. So Leonard Seppala actually competed in those Olympics in Lake Placid, New York. Although he did not win, Canada took it with, this was Emile St. Goddard who won that event.
All these interconnections in
Yeah.
dog sledding is kind of fun. So back to the history. The earliest known record of dog sledding dates back to around 1980 BC. So it's been around forever, long, long time. It's really believed that the native and Inuit people of what is now northern Canada kind of invented this mode of transportation. There's been people that have said, the North wouldn't have been inhabited if it wasn't for dogs. Dogs really enabled people to get around both as a means of hauling stuff, transporting your gear, and companionship when you're out there, and probably protection back then too from other animals. So Russian explorers were kind of credited with bringing new efficiency to dog sledding. If you saw the first picture, the dogs are running in pairs on that. And that's you have to remind me what this is called when they're fanned out, like the picture right here.
Yeah, you just said it. It's the fan hitch.
The fan
That's
hitch. Okay.
the classic kind of traditional way of hooking dogs up.
It's too obvious, I guess. So my sister was fortunate enough; she had a friend in Greenland that broke her leg or had a leg injury, knee surgery or something. But she went over there to help work her dogs while she was recovering. And this is how they ran over there, was in that fan hitch, which is kind of interesting. I suppose when you're in an area that is vastly open, it's I don't know if it's more efficient or if the dogs are just used to it doing that way, but you don't have to have them in that long, narrow pattern like we do that we see now. So I think throughout history, dogs were used to haul equipment, like I was saying, supplies, mail, gold throughout Alaska during the Klondike Gold Rush. Um, Minnesota is kind of famous for the bear grease, the Minnesota Mail Service along the North Shore. For just about 20 years, John Bear Grease and his brother ran mail up the North Shore from Two Harbors to Grand Marais. So talk about that a little bit later when you talk about the Bear Grease race. We just mentioned the Iditarod, so I had the good fortune of going up there and volunteering as a dog handler in 2006. And Brittany's been up there with her dad. And so it's kind of one of those things that if you love dog sledding, this is kind of like the Olympics of dog sledding. This is where everybody wants to go. So do you want to share a little bit about the history of the bear grease?
Yeah, the Iditarod, right?
Or
Yeah,
Iditarod, sorry.
absolutely, no problem. Yeah, so I already alluded to Leonard Seppala and the Serum Run. So in 1925 in Nome, Alaska, there was a diphtheria outbreak that was potentially devastating to the small community way up in a remote part of the state. And essentially, there was no good way to get the vaccine there. And it was this, a blizzard is coming in, again, very remote, planes can't fly, et cetera. And so a team of mushers and dogs did a, relay nonstop and were able to save this small village. So that kind of was the historic Serum Run, which did not run fully from Anchorage to Nome, but it was that experience and then that historic Iditarod Trail that later in the 1970s, the sport was sort of dying in Alaska. There was a lot more use of snowmobiles and the state was modernizing. And at that time, there were a couple people, Joe Reddington Sr., and Dorothy Page said, we don't want to see this sport leave our state, and we want to bring an event here that is going to both like commemorate the amazing history of the sport here, but also give it a future. And so they worked very hard to create the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race, which is still running to this day. And There's a lot of amazing things that the Iditarod does for the sport, predominantly just putting it on the world stage. It is kind of like you said, it's the Super Bowl of the sport. Um, Most people, if you mention dog sledding, their first thought is Iditarod because they've probably seen or heard something about it.
Exactly. It's pretty cool, and being up there is just amazing. And if you look at, I had to overlay this map of Alaska. And I've done a lot of presentations to grade school kids that are like, "Oh, Alaska, it's this great place," but you don't realize how big it is and how vast and isolated so much of Alaska is. And this is in 1925, so planes are new on the market. There's not many of them even in the state. But Anchorage is way down here in the Cook Inlet, where my pointer is now, and Nome is way out here on the Bering Sea. So you're running from southwest Missouri all the way almost to the Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota border. That's a huge area to cover.
Hmm.
And if you look at a highway map of Alaska from Anchorage straight north, if you're going to go straight north to the arrowhead of Minnesota, there's a little dot probably right about where my pointer is. It's Fairbanks. That's kind of where the road ends. That's the main north-south road. Everything west of there is not accessible still to this day. There's no roads going out there. So the only way to get access to some of these villages and stuff is by airplane or dog sled, or now they have the Iditarod bike, so you can ride your bike along the trail, I guess, in winter. That's a whole nother level of beyond what I'm going to do. But it's a
Yeah.
really it's a really cool race. I and if there's any teachers in the audience, I highly recommend going to Iditarod.com or beargrease.com and check on the education tabs. There's a ton of resources on there where you can follow mushers around and figure out mileage and distances and learn a lot about Alaska history and Minnesota history on those sites. And I think it's a great resource that is probably underutilized for a lot of people. But you just mentioned Togo and Balto. They were the two. They were Leonard Shepla's dogs. And Balto was kind of the famous one that has the statue in Central Park. I know.
Yeah, that's correct. And if you haven't had the opportunity, a really great movie to watch is the one called Togo. That's with Willem Dafoe, and it's a more recent one. It's a Disney movie, and that one actually they did a lot of consulting with Martin Boozer, who's a multi-Iditarod winner. And essentially, what that movie shows is that Togo was really the dog who did run the majority of that serum relay, but Balto, kind of, I think he might have run the last leg or something like that. So he was in the paper and he was famous, and then he's the one who, of course, like you said, has the statue in Central Park. But Togo was, I believe, the dog who ran most of it, and it's just that movie. I mean, I can't watch it without getting emotional. It's just an incredible picture of a musher and the relationship between a musher and a lead dog, which is extremely special. It's pretty amazing when there are those kind of once in a lifetime dogs that you get to experience as a musher. And I think that they did a phenomenal job portraying that. I think it's very close to reality, honestly. Though some of the things feel unbelievable, that bond between the pair is really real. And the ways there's a musher, Blake Frecking, who talks about his lead dog Eagle, and there's a little movie on that. I'll see if I can find the link and share it so that you can post it afterwards. But it's pretty incredible, the story that he tells about his lead dog, out in the boundary waters and the ice is starting to go, and he just trusts him, and the dog gets him out of there, just kind of weaves his way on good ice and gets him out of a potentially dangerous situation. But yeah, that's the stuff that happens out on the trail with these dogs.
We'll get into a little bit more of that, but yeah, the dogs are the star athletes of these races for sure.
Mhm.
I did want to point out we're going to talk about a couple famous things in the next slide, but this is one of my favorite pictures. This is out of McGrath, Alaska, when I was there setting up stuff. Elizabeth Norris, who's checking in Gary Paulson, the famous author who sadly passed away here a couple years ago, but I'm sure a lot of people have heard of his books or read Hatchet or some of that stuff, and um, it was just kind of a cool experience. He was running that race. He was he was older. I wouldn't be out there in my 60s or
Mhm.
70s running these races, but there's a lot of people that do. So, Elizabeth is actually a musher in her own right. Grew up mushing and has mushed the Iditarod a few times now. So, and speaking of famous people, um, Norman Vaughan is. I believe he passed away the year I was up there in 2006 because they dedicated the race to him. He had finished. He had raced the race 13 times, and the only time he finished, I believe he was 84 years old. It was the year before that. Came in very last, got the Red Lantern Award. But what a character! He's the first person to ever drive dog sled to the South Pole with the Admiral Byrd expedition in 1928. Um, he was also ran dogs professionally during World War II as a search and rescue person. He'd go in and rescue down planes and supported the war effort by doing that. And he did a lot of special events like the Olympics. And he crashed one of the presidential parades too. But he's what a character. And you had the good fortune of meeting him, right, Bethany?
Yeah, so growing up here in Ely, I was good friends with the Shirkey family, Paul and Susan Shirkey and their kids. And, that's sort of, they're in the circle of the Arctic explorers, I guess, along with Will Steger and others. And they were friends with Norman, so he was visiting, and he gave me a book, and that he signed, and he said, this was kind of his phrase, he said, dream big and dare to fail. And I love that. I feel like that phrase never left me. I mean, I was young. I was probably, I don't even know how old I was, before a teen, preteen, somewhere in there, 10, 12, something. And that, I mean, has like really stayed with me, never forgotten it. And I kind of say that, that's sort of what the Klondike was. It was this kind of big dream, and, had initially a lot of pushback, like, I don't think this is going to work. And yet, I kind of was like, I'm going to dare to fail and see if we can make this happen. And so that was, one of those things that it worked.
I got the book sitting on the floor here, the My Life of Adventure, another book kind of about his life story. If you're ever up for a motivating read, it's a good one too. So we're going to talk about John Bear Grease. John Bear Grease was an actual person, a Native American that lived in Beaver Bay, I believe. And this is a picture of him. Him and his brother ran the mail route. They got a contract from the U.S. government in the late 1800s, and they ran that mail route up the North Shore, which is now the commemorative John Bear Grease sled dog race. So they honor him and what he did for the North Shore. And it's been said before in some other books in history that the North Shore of Minnesota would not be the same without the dedication and ability of John Bear Grease to get mail and supplies up and down there. You figure north of two harbors, there was no roads, and that was the only link to the outside world. So these towns like Grand Marais or Beaver Bay, um, all those towns, Lutzen along the way, north of two harbors, wouldn't have survived or wouldn't have made it without him being there to run that mail supply back and forth. So you were talking about movies earlier. The movie Iron Will is one of my favorites. It's a commemorative run of a race that no longer runs. Maybe that can be your next adventure or somebody out there. But in 1917, during the war, to kind of boost morale and get some excitement back in Minnesota and back in the country, they ran a race from Winnipeg down to St. Paul for the Winter Carnival. And it was, a story about a down in his luck farm boy that came through and tried to win the purse to save his family farm. And it's a fun movie, but I'm not sure exactly how true the story is in the movie, but I've heard it's fairly accurate. So, but Winnipeg to St. Paul, it's a long race, and of course the Klondike Derby, which we're going to talk about a little bit later again here too. So, modern day mushing. So, first formal sled dog race took place in Alaska in 1908, the All Alaska Sweepstakes, which is 408 miles from Nome to Candle and back. So there are a couple other ones. I've never heard of the Gunflint Mail Run. You were telling me about that, Brittany. I don't know how long that's been going on.
Yeah, that is up in like Trail Center Lodge, which is also a checkpoint for the John Bear Grease. That's up the Gunflint Trail, and that one just happened. That's usually kind of our first race of the season, so that's in January, and that is nice kickoff, great location, fun place to spectate because Trail Center is just a great lodge. So yeah, that's the kickoff of the sled dog season here, usually in Minnesota at least.
And we got the John Bear Grease race, which starts this coming Sunday, right?
That's right.
In Duluth. So that one's coming up. The Klondike Derby, you know when that one starts?
Yeah,
It's
February 3rd and
February
4th.
3rd and 4th.
Yeah.
The UP 200 and Wolf Track Classic and the Copper Dog are all other races that are kind of in the upper Midwest. So there's lots of opportunities to get out and see these dogs in action, I guess. I took this picture on the dead rod, and it's just two dogs are just. I think this was in Unicleats, so they've been running for 700 miles already, and they're barreling into their harness, just waiting for the word to go. And when you're doing this practice, we talked a little bit about the dogs. And do you want to cover the northern breed of dogs, Brittany, a little bit?
Yeah, so um, we do have a requirement that all of the dogs competing in the Klondike, and I would say that every race pretty much has this now written into their race rules, is that the dogs are what is considered a northern breed. So the pure breeds that you might recognize are like the American Eskimo, Siberian, or the Malamute. The dog that is predominantly raced and that you would see in all these races that were on the previous slide is the Alaskan Husky, which is a mixed breed, but they descend, a lot of them from, like I would say, the Siberian, and then a lot of them have other breeds that have kind of been mixed in to give them a little bit more of that speed or the kind of like racy, lean body type. You kind of can think of these guys as, they're very strong. They can, pull a lot of weight, but pound for pound, even though the Alaskan Husky looks a lot skinnier and lighter, sometimes their markings don't even look quite so husky like these guys do. They are stronger and faster. They have less body weight to carry. So think about, elite marathon runners, right? They're very lean, very strong, and that's what the Alaskan Husky offers. But all of them, some of the requirements of that northern breed is that they have like that double undercoat, so it's the coat. Can they keep themselves warm essentially? And then they have pretty amazing feet. If you ever want to look up something interesting, look up the feet of a sled dog. There's some really good YouTube videos. You could read some articles, but you will be amazed at how their feet have special, essentially a way of warming them so that they don't get cold. Why do sled dogs' feet not get cold? It's amazing science. You could look it up. I'm not going to get all into the details of it, but we love to talk about that with our veterinarians. We also have an education team through the Klondike, so we do lots and lots of presentations at schools, and that's one of those fun facts, and it's really interesting.
So I talked to my buddy Brad last night, who used to have a team of Alaskan Malamutes, big, 80, 90-pound dogs. They're huge. And hooking those things up and dragging, wall tents and wood stoves and stuff into the wilderness is it's unbelievable, the amount of power that these dogs have. And we pulled a few trucks out of ditches and coming back from places people get stuck, and we'll just hook a couple dogs up. They'll pull them out, and it's unbelievable. But they're a lot of fun. So let's talk briefly here about the Klondike Derby a little bit. You can give a little history on that.
Yeah, so one of the fun things when I initially started working on the race, I was, of course, talking to my parents, and my dad said that he had, he had mentioned it to a friend of his who said, "Oh yeah, I used to race dogs in Excelsior in the 70s." And I was like, "What?" I had no idea that there had ever been any sled dog races in that area before. So I started doing a little bit of history, just digging into the history, seeing what I could find, looking up, just online, and ended up in the Hennepin County, digital archives. And what I discovered, the first thing that I discovered was actually the picture on the far right over there, which was the winner. Let's see, the winner of they called it the Klondike Day Dog Derby. And Klondike Day, what I found was went back all the way into the 1930s. It was part of a series of winter carnivals. You mentioned the St. Paul Winter Carnival, which was one of those winter carnivals. And a lot of these winter carnivals would have some sort of dog race as a part of it. They also had fun things like, masked skating balls and, different, snow carving and stuff like that. But they had a Klondike Day in Excelsior, and they had a dog derby where people were actually bringing kind of their pets, hooking them up to sleds and competing. They did this also in Minneapolis. There was a dog derby, like the Tribune Dog Derby, and different things that were happening around the city. So that was, once I found that out, I was like, oh my goodness, like that's where the name Klondike came from, was that Klondike Day, the historic day. That lasted for a few years, and then it kind of died out. But in the 1970s, there was an initiative through the Excelsior Chamber of Commerce to start another dog sled race. And as you can see here, so this was happening in 1974. I think the first one was in 1973, but this one here, you can see the some of the articles and the really cool graphics and things that were being drawn. Really fun. When we connected with the there's a great Excelsior Lake Minnetonka Historical Society, and it was like a treasure trove. I got to go down there and look through all these photos and articles and different things that they had, and learn more about the history. And I mean, some really fun connections. Again, you mentioned this earlier with, this is a small community. So it's like some of the people that were starting this race, they like trained mushers that are now competing, and some of them have come back to compete in the modern day Klondike. In fact, we found out that later. So the races were happening in Excelsior in the 70s, then in the 80s, a few more. Finally, in the 90s, they were over in Mound, so on the other side of the lake. And the man who has won the first two Klondike Dog Derbies actually competed in Lake Minnetonka and won in the 90s. So there's just some really great stories and history. He had a lead dog that got loose, and a family found it like, oh, a week later. It was running around and found it in their barn. It had kind of taken shelter there. And I come to find out that our lead veterinarian, also one of the founders of the race, treated that dog, and was part of this whole like story, all these threads coming together. So it was just an amazing thing as I worked on the initial race to find all of this. It was this rich history. So the first year that we put on the race, we said, we're bringing a piece of history back to the lake. And you'll see that Hug a Husky button there that's on the slide. We brought that back full force. We have Hug a Husky buttons. We have a Hug a Husky event. We thought, this is amazing. We need to, incorporate this. So we've done as much as we can to really incorporate some of the history of the sport in our area into the modern day Klondike.
I just realized when you're talking there that I got these slides mixed up. I had 74 before 73, but
That's okay.
I love the Hug a Husky thing. And I didn't want to point out, you guys have an event this Saturday as a fundraiser for the race too. Do you want to tell everybody about that a
Yeah.
little bit?
Yeah, we have the cutest puppy contest is at Back Channel Brewing. That's in Spring Park over by Mound, and that is always a really fun day. If you have a puppy, bring your puppy out. You can win some great prizes. There's a competition, and we have merchandise and food, and it's just a really fun day to kind of kick off race week for the Klondike. So, yeah, it's one of our three fundraisers. We have a brewery series at three different breweries throughout the year.
And if you don't have a puppy, you can come vote for the cutest one. So
That's right.
that sounds awesome. To see what we're doing this weekend. That sounds like a fun event. But So we mentioned the John Bear Grease that starts this Sunday, actually. It starts at just north of Duluth, finishes up in Grand Portage around the 31st. So there's multiple stops and crossings along the route where you can stop and watch and cheer the teams. There's actually several races that take on. The whole race is just over 300 miles, I think 320 miles. But they also do a junior race. It's a 40-mile race and another one that's 120 miles. So there's kind of three different categories that race during that. So it's fun to see that. They all start kind of at the same time in the same area there on Sunday. That takes a while, and then they all spread out in the trail. But it's a lot of fun. And of course, Bethany was just talking about the Klondike Derby, the 3rd and 4th over in Excelsior.
Yeah, so
Is your
this
dad
year
still a
we have,
marshal?
yeah, he is a marshal this year at the Klondike and then at the Wolf Track. He's not marshaling up at Bear Grease this year. It's kind of fun. He's handling for a very good friend of his, Keith Eiley, who he and Keith actually were rookies together in the Iditarod in 2002. They raced against each other all over Grand Portage. There used to be a race called Grand Portage, which is very similar to the Bear Grease, similar route. And then in the UP and up in Maine. So they kind of go way back. And this year, Keith is racing, and my dad will be handling for him and not doing his usual role as race marshal up at John Bear Grease. But yeah, I wanted to also mention with the Klondike. So the 3rd is an interesting day for us. The race day is actually on the 4th, but the 3rd is a day that people can come on to Excelsior and see the sled dogs. They all get, every single dog gets a thorough veterinary check. The care of the dogs is our #1 priority, their health, their fitness. These are super athletes. They have a pretty amazing, all of them, the training regimens, the diet, the nutrition, but every single dog is checked for race readiness that day. So we have our veterinarians there. We have a huge veterinary team, and they come kind of from all over, and they're checking everything from, hydration to looking at their feet, making sure that, checking their hearts. All kinds of things are looked at, and you can actually come and watch our lead vet will kind of give a sample veterinary check so you can see what they look at, and then you can kind of observe it as it's happening through all of the different teams. And we have all kinds of other things that evening, free hot cocoa and bonfire pits, and that Hug a Husky event where the mushers are just out. You can meet them, get autographs, all of that. So it's a really fun day. And then on the 4th, of course, is race day, which is a lot more um, Friday is like more relaxed, and you can kind of wander around. The energy is there. On Saturday, it's pretty intense. Those dogs are getting hooked up. They know it's a different day. You'll hear it in the dog yard that day. It's loud. As soon as they start to see those sleds come off the trucks, the harnesses come out, they are really amped up. So on that day, you can watch the race start right there in Excelsior, right down our main street, which is pretty quaint and fun. We fill our main street with snow, similar to what you would see in Anchorage during the ceremonial start of the Iditarod, or like the UP 200, which happens in Marquette, Maine. Or I'm sorry, Marquette, Michigan. Can-Am Crown is in Maine, Fort Kent. And that one also has a downtown start. That's a really fun thing. We got people jamming the streets, and then the dogs are taking off right down that main street, and then they hit Lake Minnetonka and do 40 miles and come back. So that is our race
Yep.
day. All the details, like you said, are right on the website.
Super fun. I was actually doing a dog sled education program for some teachers. And when I heard about your race last year, and then we bugged out of there right away and ran over there, and we had a great time. You guys do a fantastic job over there. It's great to be able to see them come in downtown and meet the mushers afterwards and get out in the lake and watch them run. So a couple things, if like myself, I only have one dog. I got one husky that loves nothing more than to go up by walks. And you're talking about how vocal they get when you pull a harness out or something. She'll sit by the door and just howl and talk to you until you let her out, pretty much. But one of my favorite activities is I don't ski a whole lot with her. We don't have groomed trails near me, but I do live close to the St. Croix River, which is frozen over, and I have studded tires on my bike. So I hook her up to my
Nice.
bike, and we run around a lot, and she just absolutely loves it. We do some of the bike trails in the summer too, that are more on the dog friendly side, which is always fun. This is actually a picture of Three Rivers Park District. They actually have groomed trails for ski touring up there. So if you're in the metro area, it's a great place to go if you want to exercise your dog and get outside and you enjoy skiing. We had a call on one of our social media things um, that went out earlier this week on a person that had dogs and has a sled and wanted to know where to go. I'm like, I'm not for sure. I had to make a few phone calls this morning, track some stuff down. But I know my friend Brad, we used to run in railroad right away and on some snowmobile trails down around the Red Wing area, south of Red Wing. And there's some state forest land down there too we could run in. So I called and the answer I got was state trails. State trails it is not forbidden to run your dogs on state trails. So for all the snowmobilers out there, I'm talking about you, Cassie. Watch out for dog sleds on there. They are allowed on the trails. So it's not a very popular activity, but obviously you got to use caution around them. They are also allowed in all the state forest around Minnesota. So typically those are ungroomed trails, but a lot of mushers, if they live by a state forest, may go out and snowshoe or snowmobile around to groom a trail for their dogs to run on. And a lot of our trails around Minnesota, if you go back to our snowmobiling webinar that we did here a few weeks ago, um, Wade did a great job of explaining this grant need trails, but those are actually on private land. So if you're out snowmobiling, you're out dog sledding, and you see a sign that says grant need trails, those are on private land, and you are not allowed to do any other activity other than snowmobile on. So I want to make sure we point that out. And Kawishawee Pines SNA, which is, I believe, outside of Ely up there. I know the Shirkies were big in getting that area, old growth forest, preserved. And of course, being the Shirkies and having dog teams, that is the one SNA that running your dog team on is allowed. So kind of a neat
Cool.
area there. And of course, the BWCA. I asked when we were doing our practice, I asked Bethany if she knew John Stetson because I was probably in my teens in the Boundary Waters on a winter camping trip. And dogs, when they run, you don't really hear them. They're quiet. They're working. And I just start to go up a portage, and all of a sudden, these 8 burly Malamutes come tearing down this trail. And it was John Stetson delivering the toilets they use in the Boundary Waters at the campsites. They go around and they deliver those in the winter by dog sled. So we had an interesting conversation, but I'm like, what a great way to do this. And I've been kind of chasing after that little dream ever since. I said that was just a really cool experience. But
Yeah, we like I said, I guided sled dog trips in the Boundary Waters. That was my high school job. So I spent a lot of time up there, lots of crazy stories I could tell from those years. But it is absolutely a wonderful way to see the Boundary Waters. You can cover so much territory that way. And it's just really unique, you know. I mean, there's nobody out there. I mean, until you run into John Stetson delivering toilets, but you feel like
there you
there's no
go.
one out there most of the time.
The first thing that crossed my mind was like, whose job is this and how do I get it? Because what a cool
Yes.
job. So
Yes.
my sister used to be really good friends with the lady that runs the dog sled tours in Denali National Park.
Cool.
So she used to do that. She worked for Jeff King right outside of the park. So,
Cool.
and we could tell dog sled stories probably for days on there, on here. But
Yes.
one of the stories is, we talked a little bit about the newer breeds, the northern breeds. They're not these big, heavy dogs that could haul a ton of weight. I looked it up yesterday. Of course, this is on Google, so take stock of what that is. But there's an Alaskan Malamute that weighs, I forget what he was, like 140 pounds or something, a huge Alaskan Malamute that has the record pull of like 5,400 pounds. One dog from a stop, and they pull it across the finish line. And just absolutely amazing to me
Yeah.
that they can do that.
I think
And
pound for
now,
pound, they are some of the strongest animals. They're
yeah,
pretty amazing. Yeah.
and now I didn't even put a picture of my dog in here, but real tall, sleek. Everybody thinks she has some kind of whippet or greyhound in her, um, but they're a lot of fun. And I was telling Bethany the story the other day how when I was in Uniclete, they set up the course, and every year it'd come in, say from the right hand side as you're looking out into the sound. They'd come in on the right hand side and they'd exit on the left hand side. And for whatever reason, in 2006, they ran the dogs around the back side of the sound. They came in from the left hand side, and then they went out on the right hand side. And Jeff King was the first one into Uniclete that year, winning the Gold Coast Award. And he was all upset when he came in because his dogs ran the wrong way, and they made him stop and go out and do the right way. And I'm like, how is that even possible? His lead dog was the same lead dog he had the year before, but these dogs train for thousands of miles, and they're
Hmm.
700 miles into a 1,000-mile race, and they pull
Hmm.
into one little village out of multiple checkpoints, and they go, "Oh, this is where we go. We go over
Yeah.
here." And like they change the trail, the dogs don't know that, and it's just amazing how they just they just know that stuff, and the ability of these dogs is just phenomenal to me. So,
It is amazing.
see, I need to open up my Q&A here and see what we got going on.
Yeah.
Um, looks like we had a lot of questions. Karen is on. What are your parents' names? She might know your parents.
Uh,
Karen is
yeah.
asking.
My parents are Stan and Joyce Passananti. So my dad, Stan, my mom also did actually race. They were initially into sprint racing. That was before I was born, so that was in the late 70s, early 80s. They came to Ely. They were doing the Ely All-American sprint races. And then it was later that my dad got into distance racing, and that's Stan Passananti.
Great. Sally was made. Well, I guess not a question; it's a statement. But she said the mail run started in 1977, so it's been going on for a few years up there. Steve wrote in. He's in. We didn't talk about this a whole lot. Maybe we can touch on it. I try to stay away from promoting like a specific place to go dog sledding. But Steve said he went up to Ely prior to dog sledding. They got to watch and help hook up the dogs, and it was just absolutely amazing and how excited the dogs got prior to pulling the sled. It was a very fun and enjoyable day. And after that, they went over and they got to watch the start of the Copper 100 race up there, and
Mm.
they love watching these events. So I think
So,
we have a great opportunity in Minnesota. If you live, maybe in Montana or northern Wisconsin or the UP, you might have a chance to go just visit somebody and jump on a dog sled and go.
mhm,
In Minnesota, I think if you just Google dog sledding in Minnesota, you'll probably pop up. We mentioned the Shirkies; they run wintergreen out of Ely. I know there's one
mhm.
in um, Chili Dogs around here. There's one out of St. Cloud that runs dogs where you can go and experience this, riding in a sled and what dogs are all about. So um, go to
Yeah,
Google.
it's like,
Google's your friend on that, but I don't know if you have any specifics on that, Bethany.
I mean, it's a great, like, it's a great way to see the sport. A lot of the mushers, I mean, it kind of goes where some of the tour kennels, they also race, and some of the tour kennels there are actually, they take retired racing dogs. So you mentioned Chili Dogs, that's actually owned by my in-laws.
Oh,
My
really?
brother-in-law, Jake, so my husband and I grew up together in northern Minnesota, and his little brother we hired as a kennel hand back when we had about 100 dogs that were doing both trips and racing, and we needed help in the kennel, and so Jake came and helped us out, and eventually my dad had him helping guide trips. And when my dad retired, Jake got some of those dogs. And over the years, he built up that Chili Dogs. Also, White Wolf is another one. And that was run by Stu McIntyre, who was also a guide for us. In fact, he bought White Wolf trips from my parents. So lots of connections, all great people. I mean, you can't go wrong. There's so many good people up here running different types of trips. If you want to go winter camping, if you just want to do a short ride, you can find it in Neely. And of course, I think on the North Shore as well, there's some other really great options.
Yeah. So they say Google is your friend. Check them out. It's if you're looking for something to do in the winter, it's a great family activity that you do multiple nights if you want, or just a day. Have a lot of fun doing that. So,
Mhm.
Carlene asked if Grant Aid trails are always marked with signage. I'm not positive on that. I'm going to refer you back to our snowmobiling talk we did a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, excuse me. I also did put a link in there if for our DNR site, state trails. It has all the state trails listed on there. So if you are looking for a place to run dogs or ski on snowmobile trails, go there and check that out. So Mia asked, did you say that Alaskan Huskies are different from Siberian Huskies, i.e., are they different kinds of Huskies? Not sure I heard that right.
Yeah, so the Siberian Husky is a pure breed. That would mean that it can be an AKC registered dog. There are a couple mushers that do run true Siberian purebred Huskies. The Freckings are probably the most well-known, very fast Siberian team. For Siberians, they are going to be, Siberians are going to be slower than Alaskan Huskies, but these guys run fast. Siberians, they did come in first and second in the Bear Grease a few years back, and you'll see Blake Frecking and his young daughter Elena in the Klondike. They ran it last year together. They'll run it again this year. And you would notice if you just sat and you watched all the dog teams leave without me saying anything, you would be like, oh, that's them. Because their dogs are beautiful and fluffy and have blue eyes and look like the movies. So yes, the Alaskan Huskies are a different breed. They do descend probably from Siberians or Malamutes or, one of those classic, breeds, but they're a mix. There's no, there's no pedigree. They certainly, the mushers will know their lineage, but there's no pedigree. They're not an AKC breed.
There's that, and I think when you're AKC breed, like a Siberian has distinct tail, distinct coat,
Mm-hmm.
distinct colorings,
Mm-hmm.
and Alaskan Huskies can run the gamut of everything. So
Yes. Yeah.
you never know. So everybody with our little dog Willow, she's we call her an Alaskan Husky, and that's what she is. She comes out of a racing kennel. She's one of Mitch Seavey's dogs. Is one of her
Hmm,
relatives.
cool.
She comes from Alaskan kennel originally. Her parents do, I guess, but um, they are bred to run fast and love to pull. And I think personality is a big part of it that people miss out on. Some people get,
Hmm.
think of sled dogs and they're like, oh, sled dogs. They're these big, strong, ornery dogs, and they're not at all. I don't think I've ever met like a mean sled dog. They're all like super. They love people and they like being petted, and they're a lot of
Hmm.
fun. So
One other thing I want to add on that too is just they're born with a drive to pull. And that is something that makes them unique. Like we might look at a sled dog and you're like, oh, it looks like my lab, and my lab likes to pull me while I'm on a walk, But your lab also, when you pick up a stick and you're at the end of the dock, right? Like the the retrievers, you don't have to like I have a Great Pyrenees right now. And when we got him, I was like, all right, fetch, buddy, and he looked at me like, what are you talking about? But that dog lives with my chickens and they can go in his house and he doesn't do anything. He guards them, but he will do nothing to the chickens. Whereas my dad has a hunting dog that I can't let near my chickens because he's a bird dog and that's what he's bred to do. And
yeah,
he will kill them. And that's what he's made to do essentially for hunting purposes. But the sled dogs are born to pull. And a lot of people ask, how do you teach them to pull? Well, you don't really teach them to pull. You put a harness on them and they know what to do. They might learn the specifics by running next to an older dog, but they're born and bred to pull.
And you're not going to teach them not to pull either, because
Yeah.
they really love to pull. And my dog, for a little bit, will walk next to me on a leash, but at the end of the leash all the time. Not
Yes.
pulling hard. She doesn't pull hard in a leash. In a harness, she'll pull harder, but
Yeah.
you're not going to teach them not to pull because that's what they really want to do.
Yes.
Janine, my wife, is sitting upstairs. She says hi. She'll see you in a couple weeks at the Klondike. She wanted me to share the information about the young
Hi.
musher. Um, oh, now I'm going to blank on his name. Morgan
Yeah.
from Michigan. From Michigan, his
Wisconsin.
sister Talia. What's
Mm-hmm.
the last name? I'm blanking on the last name.
Martins, the
Martins. There
Martins.
you go.
Yep. They'll be
So
mushing at the Klondike, and Morgan won the junior Iditarod a couple years back. He works with Ryan Reddington a lot, who has a kennel. He's from Alaska, but has a kennel there in Wisconsin as well. So yeah.
a great family and really nice kids. And he's was he like 14 now, 15, something like that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we have
A lot of
several
mushing.
junior mushers this year. I think more than we ever have. So it'll be really fun to watch them
Oh,
compete.
nice. Uh, Mia asked, what does trail, what does it mean if a trail is a grant and a trail? So we have, again, defer you to the snowmobiling webinar. Across Minnesota, we have more miles of snowmobile trail than we do state highways. I think like 23,000 miles of snowmobile trails around Minnesota. And a good chunk of them are grant need trails. So what that means is a local club will work with landowners and they'll maybe provide a little bit of funding or maintenance or something like that to the landowner for the ability to snowmobile across his property. So that's a grant and aid trail. They allow us to snowmobile and connect larger pieces of property and stuff. So, and again, no dog sledding on grant and aid trails. They're snowmobile only. Nick was wondering, what's the best way to get into ski touring? Dog sledding seems like a much bigger commitment. I would agree
Yes.
100%.
Yes. Um, you can jump in if you want to. The only thing I was going to say is you mentioned Three Rivers. When we lived in the Twin Cities, there was a time my husband worked with Three Rivers. Great, amazing resource for the metro area, and they do offer, like you said, some groomed ski touring trails. I believe they also have clinics, or at least would have resources. I would mention Sundog Sports. That's a company. I think there's a couple more that are mentioned down here. Jack in the Pack and Brave the Snow maybe would have equipment as well, but Sundog Sports is one that is a sponsor of the Klondike, and you can get the gear, and I always say find a mentor, find someone who's doing it, and ask if you can come and observe, and get some pointers, and start by going to some of the events. There's some great ski touring races in the area, and I would just go watch and learn and then get to know people. It's a really welcoming community. I can't specifically speak to ski touring because I don't know that community, but it's so closely related to the larger dog sledding community, and people are really welcoming and want to share.
And it's across the board. It is a just a great community in the mushing world and in the ski touring world and the dog community in world in general, I think.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
um, Jody was wondering, she's wondering about the Hug a Husky event. Can we actually hug a husky at the event, or is it more of a watch and observe?
I love that question. Thank you for asking. Yeah, what we always say is make sure that you ask mushers before you touch their dog. Some of them are definitely shy, and part of that too is like we're bringing them into a very loud, crazy environment. I mean, we have loudspeakers and there's music and there's stuff like that, and so it's kind of a tense environment. But that being said, I know that there are several mushers that do allow people to pet their dogs, and they're friendly and happy. And, I mean, you can go on our social media and see the cute pictures of, the puppy kisses and all that. So yes, you are allowed to hug a husky at the event, but we always say, please ask the musher before you touch their dogs. And it kind of is obvious to the ones that are, out and kind of they're looking for attention, and the ones that are maybe a little bit pulled back just because it's an overwhelming event with a lot of people.
Yeah. And I will warn you, Jody, we went dog sledding at Otter River Kennels and came home with a puppy. So we've been getting lots of hugs for 2 years now. But the hair in the house.
Yes.
Sue was wondering, are there any plans to add shorter events to the Klondike in the future? Well, there's a lot of Twin City mushers that only have 2 or 3 dogs in like the 4 or 5 mile or 4 to 10 mile routes.
Yeah, that's a great question. We are asked that a lot. There's a lot of factors that play into that. I mean, the bottom line is we would love to do that, but we are a fully volunteer board of directors. And in terms of capacity for adding to our event right now, we're pretty maxed out. And the other aspect of it as well is putting sled dog teams in a metro area, and especially for us running on a lake trail is actually you need a really you need experienced mushers. Like, we'd love to do a rec race because that is part of what grows the sport, is getting people the opportunity to run those shorter mileage races with fewer dogs. But it's pretty, when you get out there on that lake with a lake trail, it's really not a good atmosphere for someone who doesn't have many, many, many miles and a really good leader. And so we are kind of like, oh, are there ways that we could work with, there's some other sled dog organizations in the area, and maybe we can put, something on in cooperation. But right now, I would say the short answer is no, there aren't really plans. There's a lot of questions about it, and there's a lot of like, maybe someday that would be nice, but our specific team doesn't feel like we have the capacity to add that. I would say maybe if we ever got to a point where we had some paid staff members and we were able to say, all right, it's time to expand and see where this can go. But right now we're not there. So
There's you always get more volunteers to help out and organize smaller stuff too.
yes, yeah.
Like Bethany was saying, that what was Colonel Norman Vaughan's quote? Dream large and
Dream big and dare to fail.
dream big and dare to fail. So maybe you want to start a Twin Cities mushing club that runs 2 to 3 dogs, and that'd be fun and interesting. So
Yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
thank yous going on. Appreciate your time very much. I think this is a great event. It's great to get the word out about dogs and dog sledding across the state. I was just looking at the poll answer. Thanks to those of you that answered that. We can go over that later, but about 50% have dogs and don't have dogs. But 93% of people are hoping to watch a race in person this year. So, which is pretty awesome. So,
Good. Good.
welcome
Well,
everybody to the race weekends, and I hope to see you out there. I'm sure Bethany does too. I'm sure all the dogs and mushers would like to see people coming out and cheering them on also. For those of you new to the Moss program, I hope you stick around. Next week, we're going to go from the cold Arctic regions of dog sledding to the warm waters of mussels. We're going to talk about native
ooh,
mussels next week. And Madeline Paletta is going to join us from the DNR talking about how we're working to repopulate some of our mussel population. So it'll be an interesting topic next week. So until then, stay warm, stay safe, have fun outside, and hopefully get out and enjoy some time with the dog. So thanks, everybody.
thank you.
Head to the back room.